Okay, it's my pleasure to have here Claudia Draxl. So Claudia just got a permanent position as a professor in University of Graz in '97, and then he moved as a full professor, the Einstein professor in Humboldt-Universität, where she is right now. She has a list of awards, and which is it's very impressive. And maybe I could just say that she got the Least Minor Lecturer of German and Austrian Physical Societies, the Fellow of APS, and the Science Award of Federal State of Styria, and many other ones. And maybe Claudia wouldn't remember me, so I met her like in a couple of workshops. Probably the last one it was in SECAM in Switzerland, and I was very impressed by her work. And I have to say that she is she has a very long-standing career in ab initio calculations. So this is what she's going to talk about today: what is ab initio, and what is the state of the art for this type of calculations and how we are modeling. And in particular, she's going to focus on the light-matter interaction part that is providing support to the community to do calculations in spectroscopy. I don't know what type of spectroscopy she's going to talk about it, but she has been developing a code that is called exciting, which is very nice, very well used in the community, very well known. And I guess that she will talk about this code now. And this code, it has several implementations which allow you to calculate from absorption, RIXS, and other spectroscopy calculations you can perform in materials. So with that, thank you very much, Claudia, to be here. And yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. So let me go right into the topic. So I would like to give you a little overview of what we can do nowadays with theoretical methods, but also where the challenges are and where the new developments are actually going. So in that sense, I would like to give you a little guided tour through some examples that we have been working on for long. First of all, about optical spectroscopy, then level alignment also, but also optical spectroscopy and all kinds of interactions in this hybrid inorganic-organic systems. I will talk a little bit about RIXS, about pump probe spectroscopy, and finally you can combine them, RIXS and pump probe spectroscopy, also to talk about pumped RIXS. I make the theory part very short at the beginning. I come back to some of these equations later, so it will be not very theory heavy, to be honest. So what are we doing in our daily life? Typically we use for ground state calculations, for structural properties, and for the simple electronic structures, all the Conchem equation of density functional theory. Of course, this comes with a little caveat with this exchange correlation potential for electron-electron interaction, and depending on how good this approximation is, also the spectroscopy properties will be. That's why we definitely don't rely on that. But if you really want to talk about electronic structure, we typically use many-body perturbation theory. So for instance, the simplest possible approach is the so-called G0W approximation, where we basically start with the Conchem potential that we have underneath here and the corresponding single particle eigenvalues, but then you correct for these eigenvalues by including all these interactions in terms of a self-energy. And this gives us a pretty reliable, let's say, quasi-particle energy, so the band structure, in other words. And this band structure is then the starting point for doing better if you want to do optical spectroscopy or core-level spectroscopy. We typically solve the Bethe-Salpeter equation of many-body perturbation theory, which in short includes not only the Hamiltonian of this many-electron, many-hole system that we can do with these two theories, but explicitly includes also a Hamiltonian that takes into account the electron-hole interaction. And this gives us then electron-hole wave functions. So here this is a matrix form. These are the coefficients of the electron-hole wave function. I come back to this, and also the pair energies, so the excitonic energies. So this is the basis. Basically, we're working with every day all the systems we're investigating, and I'll come back to some of these aspects whenever I talk about things that will go beyond. So let me show you just one example what we can do with this. This is a comparison with experiment. And this is, you see here a number of authors, many of them. So besides Wahib Agun, who was the theorist in my group, these are all experimental colleagues we have been collaborating with. And to get this result. So this is barium steinite. It's a perovskite, very highly symmetric cubic phase here. But what I'm particularly fond of is this agreement between theory and experiment. So what you see here is the solution of the Bethe-Salpeter equation. This is the black line. In comparison, we see the independent quasi-particle approximation. So if you leave out electron-hole interaction, and you see there's an enormous effect, the whole spectrum is shifted by quite a bit, in particular the higher energy range. So electron-hole interactions are utterly important here. But it's not only that we get these peak positions right compared to experiment, but also the intensities. So the calculation is as it comes out. There is no fudge factor, no shift, no nothing, and the same is the experiment as it comes out from the electron microscope. So what is behind this actually? Because sometimes even for simple materials you don't see such a good agreement. So the reason behind this is actually that we really took into account here electron-electron interaction, electron-hole interaction, and also electron-phonon coupling on equal footing. So each of these effects is a few tenths of an electron volt shifting around the peak positions, but if you take into account everything, you end up having the peak positions where they should be. But there's also a secret from the experimental side, which I will tell you in a minute, but just let me emphasize here, we have two excitons, this A exciton, which are excitations at the gamma point across the band gap, and then there is another exciton which is called P, and this takes into account interactions mainly at the R point and the little vicinity around that. Now, having access to this two-body wave function, electron-hole wave function, we can analyze this wave function, and this is what you see here. It's a six-dimensional object, so depending on the position of the electron and the hole that the electron leaves behind. So we have to do a trick in order to visualize it. And this is basically we put or choose the position of the hole, for instance, here, and then you see that this electron spreads out quite a bit around this hole, which is indicative of a very small electron-hole binding energy because the electron can travel far away from the hole. And in fact, the binding energy here is only 0.1 electron volt. You see this here. Here is the onset, the nominal onset at the gap, and this A exciton is a little bit below. So this B exciton actually is much more localized that you see here. So it's very close. So the electron is very close to the hole. In other words, it has a much stronger electron-hole binding. And this is not actually a very usual case. Typically, you would say at higher energies, you would have more independent transitions. But in this case, you really have a very strongly bound exciton at higher energies, which agrees very nicely with experiment. So, having said this, I would like to, well, I owe you still the secret of the experimentalists, actually. So why is this agreement so good? Because this measurement has been done with a very high resolution electron microscope, and high resolution means not only energy resolution, but also spatial resolution. So what my colleagues could focus on a spot in the sample that was defect-free. So in other words, what we compare here is the calculation for a perfect crystalline material with an experiment done on a perfect crystalline material. Now, in the meantime, of course, oxides are never perfect crystalline, so if you would focus on a different spot on the sample, you would see all the defects and the situation would change completely. So if you're interested, I can also show you later how we deal with imperfect materials, but for the time being, I just wanted to show you here what we can do in terms of comparison with experiment. Now, having this said, so I introduced before how we deal with all the electronic aspects of electronic structure theory and then spectroscopy. But as I mentioned, in this case, it was also important to take into account the renormalization of the band gap due to electron-phonon coupling. So what we're doing right now in my group is really try to incorporate aspects of vibrational coupling in all these theoretical levels here. And this I will come back later. We also try to include time, the time aspects here. Now, but let me go back first to just an electronic structure problem. And actually, this goes back while dealing with these interfaces between organic molecules or molecular layers, like pyrene in this case, and then inorganic semiconductors. So here it's a TMD, MOS2, since quite a while. But still, these materials are extremely challenging for theory. And the reason simply is because they're so different in nature. These two sides of the interface are so different in nature that we don't have a very good solution for the electronic structure for the combined system. So as long as we stay with this organic semiconductor, we basically know what we're doing. Band gaps are typically underestimated, but once you know what we do, it's fine, we can deal with this. And the same for the inorganic semiconductors. There are ways to describe them very well, but if you bring them together, this is still a challenge. And simply for the fact because there is no DFT functional that makes both sides equally happy. So we always have to find a compromise. So let's start with something very simple. These systems are actually very complicated. That's why we like to start with something lightweight. This is the PBE functional, which of course, if you just look at the MOS2 here, underestimates the band gap quite a bit. If we then correct this by the GW approximation that I introduced before, so we introduce self-energy effects, electron-electron interaction, then the band gap opens up, which is then close, relatively close to experiment. We can do, as I said, also the same thing for the organic semiconductor. Again, the band gap is of course much underestimated, increases by a factor of 2 or so if you apply the GW correction. So fine, but what happens if we put these things together? Again, I start with the density functional theory part. And you see at the one glance, if you compare these levels, this is the with the left side. So these are the levels of MOS2 at the interface. And on the right side, these are the levels of the molecular layer at the interface. You see they're exactly the same like in the pristine system. And that's quite clear because these are purely van der Waals bound materials, so there is no chemical bond in there, and that's why the level alignment, at least on the DFT side, is just given by the vacuum level alignment. So you can compute the vacuum level, align the vacuum level, and then see how they align with respect to each other. And this is actually what happens on the DFT side. Now, what happens now if you apply the GW correction? Then you see that, in fact, the level alignment changes from type 2 to type 1. And that's not the only system where we found that DFT gives you qualitatively the wrong answer. We have investigated a few systems where this problem appears everywhere. So you must be very lucky to get the right answer from DFT. But if you apply GW, then hopefully you get the right thing. So what is amazing here, it's not only that it changed the level alignment, but also if you look at the effect of the self-energy, so the correction, this is very different in the pristine system, molecular material compared to the molecular levels at the interface. And the reason for this is obviously that these other sides, the MOS2, has some effect on the self-energies here, and this effect is screening. So we put this MOS2 layer close to the molecular side. It provides additional screening to this electron-electron interaction, and that's why the self-energy effects are much less pronounced than in the pristine system. So we know this, if you put a molecule on a metal surface, for instance, we know that these band gaps are basically renormalized. It was quite surprising that the effect is that strong, right? What is probably more surprising is that this effect also happens on the other side. So obviously, the presence of the molecular layer also provides additional screening to MOS2 and reduces the band gap, the MOS2 band gap by 0.3 electron volt. So, well, the question, of course, do we trust this, right? DFT gives you the wrong answer. Does GW give you the right answer? And of course, there's uncertainties around there. And we have to be particularly careful because, I mean, if you look here, that the levels, the HOMO level of the molecular monolayer actually just dips down a little bit. It's 0.1 electron volt below the valence band maximum of MOS2. So this is just a very vulnerable, not a very stable situation here. So let's investigate now what can go wrong and how, if it's stable, right? So of course, I mentioned before, there is no DFT functional that makes both sides equally happy. So let's go to the other extreme. Let's use a hybrid functional and see what happens. We know hybrid functionals opens the gaps. So we see this here. Gray lines are the DFT levels, so the band gap opens on both sides. But then if you put GW on top, this is the colored level, you see the band gap further opens. But in essence, and this is the most important thing, nothing happens here. So the level alignment is robust, independent of the DFT starting point here. So alignment is not affected. This is very good news, actually. That means we can use any starting point. It will not be quantitatively perfect, but it will be qualitatively okay at least. So I mentioned before electron-phonon coupling was important for this other material. So what about this? Because we know that electron-phonon coupling reduces band gaps. And if you can, well, let me go back here. If the reduction is more pronounced here in the organic layer, it could be that this shifts back. So we could get back to the DFT alignment if we are unlucky, right? So that's why we try to also compute electron-phonon coupling in this system. Now, what do we know about this? We know already from MOS2 that electron-phonon coupling renormalizes the band gap, reduces it by a little bit less than 0.1 electron volt. So what would happen on the organic side? And there's many such calculations and experiments that tell this. We also do this, so we compute this actually in a very similar manner like the GW approximation. So we put all this electron-phonon interaction into a self-energy and renormalize the electronic structure with respect to electron-phonon coupling. So we put this here, not only electron-electron, but also electron-phonon coupling here. And this is what we get. We see, so in red is the band structure without electron-phonon effects. And in yellow, you see the effect of the spectral function, so how electron-phonon interaction renormalizes the electron structure. And there you see that the conduction band moves a little bit down, the valence band moves a little bit up. So in essence, this is this little bit less than 0.1 electron volt lowering of the band gap. So let's be surprised what happens to the total system. And this is the combined system, the band structure of the combined system at 0 Kelvin. So you see here from the spectral function, there is very strong electron-phonon coupling effects. You see, for instance, here this molecular level moves out and moves up, and we have a strong also widening of the individual levels. But in essence, the level alignment does not change, and this also does not change at 300 Kelvin. So in all the cases, we are below the HOMO of the molecular level is below the valence band maximum of the MOS2. So, and very interestingly, we find the molecular satellite here. So if you have good eyes, you will see that there is another yellow line popping up. So, but now let me go to spectroscopy again. So of course also for this system we can solve the Bethe-Salpeter equation to get the optical excitations for the system. And this is what you see here. Betazal beta result is the black line compared to the independent quasi-particle approximation, which is gray. Again, we find very strong effects of excitons, right? What is interesting to note here is, so in red are just excitations of MOS2, which are lowest in energy because of this level 1 alignment. But very interesting, in this region here, we find these excitations that are marked in blue, and these are charge transfer excitations. And I like this very much because, I mean, you want to have charge transfer excitation at interfaces for solar cells, for instance, because then you have the electron and the hole separated in different parts of the unit cell of the material, and you can transport electrons and holes away to the electrodes easily. And I like this result very much because the first time that we saw these charge transfer excitations in the visible range of the spectra, typically they are in much higher energies. So, and that's why I would like to show you also the electron-hole wave function that clearly shows this. On the left, you see the band structure, and what is color-coded here is are the bands that are involved in this low energy or in these transitions. So in red, these are the levels that are affected, well, these are the whole character, and if you look at the right, if you position the electron here, then you see the hole is exclusively sitting on the molecular level. This is where you excite these electrons, whereas if you now put this electron somewhere, the hole somewhere, then you see that the electron is exclusively sitting in the MOS2. So really have the charge electron and the hole separated, well separated from each other. Now, talking about electron-phonon interaction, I have to admit that we did not put electron-phonon interaction in the optical spectra yet. We're working on this. This is also a big challenge. It shows up in different ways. One way we have seen before is that it renormalizes the electronic structure and lowers typically the band gap of many materials. But there are also other effects that may show up in optical spectra. And this is particularly so for polar materials, because in polar materials, vibrational coupling provides additional screening effect. So if you basically displace the atoms according to a polar mode, this creates a dipole, and this dipole will add additional screening to the electron-hole interaction. So we put this in, and for this reason I go back to the Betazal beta equation. So we have seen the Betazal beta equation above. So here you see all the indices, very complicated beasts with depending on valence bands, conduction bands, key points. I show this in a minute. But most important is that this Hamiltonian consists of 3 different terms. One is this diagonal term. It's just a direct transition. So if we would switch off the other terms, then it's just the independent particle approximation. So electron and hole wouldn't see each other, and the transition would just take place in the at the distance, energetic distance between valence and conduction bands. But if you switch on electron-hole interaction, it comes with 2 additional terms. And this attractive term that really makes the binding between the electron and the hole is this here. And this actually includes the screening. So it's not that the electron and the hole, they brutally see each other, but they only see each other somehow screened. And that's why we have very different excitonic effects in metals where they basically don't exist, but screening is very efficient in metals. In semiconductors, we have rather small binding energies of a few milli-electron volt or 0.1 electron volt or so. And in insulators and molecules, these exciton binding energies could be electron volts. So they're very, very big. So what I would like to point out is actually that typically, both in the GW approximation and in the Betazal beta equation, we only include the screening that comes from the electron cloud around. But in principle, as I said before, in polar materials, we have additional contributions from the phonons. And so we edit here this screening part coming from electron-phonon interaction. Now, this is what you see here, what happens. So just a pure electronic spectrum, and this is gallium nitride here is the blue curve. And the yellow or green, there's not much difference here, is actually if you include electron-phonon coupling terms. So you could ask the question, is this important, right? Because this is just a little shift of the whole spectrum to the right. So it could be important because we will see how big this is, and in view, for instance, of the effect that I showed you before, that this level alignment is basically depending on a few milli-electron volt or 0.1 electron volt. This is an order of magnitude actually that is in the same ballpark. Now, but in order to visualize the changes here, we take the difference between these two spectra, and then you see wherever we have an exciton, we see an increase of dielectric function here, followed by a decrease. This just gives rise to the shift that we see here. So in other words, what happens, we have a blue shift, that the screening, additional screening reduces the exciton binding. Right? So exciton binding means that we get absorption below the transitions, so the independent particle transitions, and what this additional screening does, it shifts a little bit back, such that somehow it decreases the exciton binding energy. And we see this not only for gallium nitride, but also for other polar materials like magnesium oxides, for instance. Now, staying for magnesium oxide, what I show here is the first 4 excitons. What we see again in these band structures, where these transitions come from. So the first one only from the gamma points, the second one a little bit reaching out, and so on and so forth. But what I wanted to point out here, this is the difference in the exciton energy or exciton binding energy in milli-electron volt. You see, so this in essence, this is 50 milli-electron volt. It's not huge, but it may matter in case of systems that we have seen actually before. Now, having talked about vibrations, I also would like to introduce now time as a variable. For this, we not only, well, in principle, we could propagate GW Bethe beta equation in time. For the time being, for the examples that I'm going to show you, we take a shortcut because this is much more convenient to work with at the moment. And this is time-dependent density functional theory because it concludes time as a natural factor or variable. And this allows us to do pump-probe spectroscopy. And so let me remind you, this is the Bethe beta equation. So what we do here, in order to compute the exciton wave function, we have to, for optical excitations, we sum up overall excitations between valence and conduction bands. And this combinations of them form one exciton. So different independent excitations team up to form one exciton, and this shows up here in the equation that we sum up over valence conduction bands and also K points. We can do exactly the same also for core excitations because we are having an all-electron code. That means now the initial states come from very low-lying core states, and we can select them individually. That means we don't need to sum up over the different states here because they're far away from each other. We can select the KH and LH and MH according to our will, but in essence we use exactly the same equation in order to get core spectra. So in the core spectra, actually, you see what exciton binding does. They shift the binding energy. We've seen typically to the left because of this exciton-hole binding, but they also renormalize the shape of the spectra in terms of the oscillator strength. So now we can do transient absorption spectroscopy with this. And I'll show you here an example that we did with Renske van der Weens group at Helmholtz Center Berlin. So they did the experiment They came in with a laser pump of 355 nanometers and then an X-ray probe. And this is an example of zinc oxide here. Now the way how we describe this theoretically is that we start from a DFT ground state, then we use time-dependent, real-time time-dependent density functional theory to propagate the system in time. This gives us the time-dependent occupation that we can also vary the bump fluence here in order to follow this. And then we put this into the non-equilibrium Bethe-Salz beta equation in order to get the spectra out. And then depending on where we put this different population, we can distinguish also between Pauli blocking and screening effects. So this, for instance, is a spectrum you see here, or this is the transient spectrum. So it's the difference of this spectrum subtracting the equilibrium spectra here. You see experimentally, these are the colored areas. You have a negative contribution here, followed by positive, negative contributions. And you see that, of course, the effect is stronger, even stronger, if you change or increase the pump fluence. Different pump fluences. We can get the same, actually, or at least qualitatively. It's not completely quantitative, but from this simple theoretical approach, I think we couldn't expect probably more. We can basically get the same results from our theoretical approach. Now we can, as I said, we can also distinguish between Pauli blocking, which means that upon bumping, so to say, you will populate conduction bands which are not available then anymore for further excitations. This is, however, a very small effect here, and I think the major effect comes from the fact that this additional charge in the conduction band causes additional screening of this core hole excitation, and this makes the major part, at least in the femtosecond spectra. Now, I also show you some other example from a two-dimensional material, tungsten selenide, our M4 5-edge. The equilibrium spectrum is in black compared to experiment, which agrees very nicely in these two peak positions. Don't worry about this, because this is from a lower edge experimentally that we didn't include here. Right? So what we see here, depending on different pump fluences, we see some shifting to the red, which again, like in the other case, means that we decrease the excitonic effect upon additional screening, cohort screening. Or in other words, if you look at the transient spectra, you get a decrease of intensity followed by increase and up and down, which I think we can capture also here the main effects, but you see there's also some discrepancies here in the low energies. And these become even stronger if you go away from the femtosecond regime and go to the picosecond regime. And there you see, so if you now, well, we deal with this by increasing the temperature, because on the picosecond, so the sample or the surrounding of this spot is equilibrated, so we can take into account this effect by increasing our lattice parameter and taking a lattice parameter, a lattice temperature of 700 K. Then we see that in fact the spectrum shifts to the left and gives you an upturn of the spectra, which again is in agreement with experiment. So maybe the second last example is it's not really a time-dependent probe from our side, but it's also combining different excitations. And this is the RIXS process. So resonant inelastic X-ray scattering, how do we deal with this? So let me just summarize what the process does. You come in with an X-ray excitation, that's why we have this X here, which excites electrons from the core level to the conduction level. Then you end up, well, and you describe this with the Bethe-Salz beta equation, namely that we have a transition probability for this that depends on this exciton weights or the exciton-hole wave function basically, and the atomic-like selection rules that we have. So this is what enters the beta equation in terms of transition probabilities. Now we end up with an intermediate state here. We have electrons in the conduction band, and we have holes in the core states, which of course is not very convenient for instance, for these valence electrons, because they could fall down here and gain energy. And this is what happens in the next step. So the occupied valence states would tumble down to the core states, and at the end, we can also describe this with our transition probabilities according to beta equation in essence. So we have a second transition probability, again depending on the selection rules, but this time it's the selection rules between the valence and the core states here, whereas here we had core states and conduction bands. Then we have again these matrix elements here showing up, or these coefficients showing up, and then we have the coefficients that are marked with lambda O, and the O comes from the fact that at the end the final state looks just like an optical excitation. We have holes in the valence band and electrons in the conduction. Looks like a normal optical exciton. Now, we can take all these processes together and compute a differential cross-section here, which again looks like a transition probability of beta beta. That means we have a oscillator strength here, and we have again a delta function or energy denominator with this optical energy here, whereas the initial energy pops up here. And if we now further put in this or split up this T3, it's just a product of these two transition probabilities, and then you see that where the omega 1 comes in, and here where this electron loss comes in. So let me show you one example, just for clarity how important also in this process electron-hole interaction is. Because if we compare this, differential cross-section, this is a function of the energy loss and the original excitation energy, then we see a huge difference between the solution of the beta equation and the independent particle equation. So obviously excitonic effects are very important here. But I would like to show you another example which I like more. It's again an oxide. Gallium oxide. This is a very nice sample from the Institute of Crystal Growth in Berlin, next door. This comes with several polymorphs. We have different coordination of gallium and oxygen atoms. I will focus on one phase here in order to show you where the RIXS process comes from. So this is alpha gallium oxide, where we only have one inequivalent gallium site. This is the band structure. And the band structure has basically S character, gallium, and to some extent oxygen S character in the conduction bands. And it has mainly oxygen P character in the valence band, but also some mixture of gallium S. And this is important actually to understand. There's a tiny little mixture, but it's important to understand the RIXS spectrum. So what you see here is again the double differential cross-section. Here as a function of the energy loss. So the optical excitation, that's why we plot the optical spectrum on top here with different excitons. And here we have the excitation energy, the X-ray excitation energy, and that's why I plot the X-ray spectra here. And what the RIXS process does is basically couples these excitons on of these two different different energy regions. So what we can see is that we have a very strong coincidence here of this bright spot with the first X-ray exciton, and this simply comes from the fact that this transition from gallium, it's an LH spectrum, gallium to P states, to the unoccupied gallium S states is allowed. It's dipole allowed. So the selection rules work very well. And then we also see that there's a very strong coincidence of this bright spot with this exciton here in the optical range. And now if we look at we have seen already now these are the gallium S states, the valence band in principle has B character, as I said, oxygen B character, but it has this tiny little admixture of gallium S states. And this makes actually also this process allowed. And that's why we have a very pronounced interaction, exciton-exciton scattering between the valence range and the core range. So now I've shown you that we can do RIXS. We can also do a bump probe spectroscopy. Now, if we combine these two techniques, we can also do bump RIXS. And here I'd like to show you some example that we did together with Marco Malvestuto from Elettra. So again, you see here the RIXS spectra. I cut it short in rather good agreement with experiment. Not everything is perfect. I think actually we understood that most of the electronic features we can describe very well. So where we have some discrepancies, we can, I can't talk about that because of time issues, but they come from electron-phonon coupling. So we can understand basically all the spectrum here, but the electronic part is very well reproduced by the calculations. And then we can pump the whole thing. You see here, you have this optical pump, and then we have this X-ray probe again, which is done with a free electron laser in Elettra. And also here we see basically the features in very good agreement with experiment. So I don't know if I have still time, a few minutes for a last example. Or so I can also do time-resolved, angle-resolved photoemission. And for this, I come back to yet another example of an inorganic-organic interface here. And I have to admit that we don't do it time-dependent, but what we do with our static BSE reflects the time dependence of experiment. And this is I would like to show you. So this is PTCDA on tungsten selenide. That's the band structure of the combined system. The color coding tells you that the black levels are pure molecular character, whereas the golden levels are the character of tungsten selenide. So what is interesting here that we have different types of excitons, and I focus on two of them. So we have this K exciton, so to say. This is going from at the K point, so you see it only involves levels of tungsten selenide. But then we have a so-called hybrid X exciton, and I'll explain you in a minute what this. And this is something where we are very happy about this, because we really could disentangle, so to say, the contributions from both from theory and experimental side. So on the left-hand side, you see the ARPES experiment, KX, and the bright spots tell you where these excitations are. So the nice thing is with the time-resolved ARPES, typically ARPES give you the information about the valence band, but upon pumping ARPES, you populate the conduction band. And this is why you get information about the conduction bands and get information about excitons, because then you have access to electrons and the holes at the same time. So what you see, typically, you would excite this K exciton, and these were the spots here in this hexagon. But if you wait up to 500 femtoseconds and so, then we start populating, or experimentally start to populating also the conduction bands of the organic side, and forming an exciton that has then contributions from the LUMO of the molecule and contributions from both, from the HOMO of the molecule and the valence band maximum of the TMDC. And this is what you see here. The K exciton only has contributions, is purely a TMDC exciton, so we have the electron distribution and the hole distribution both in the tungsten selenide side. But if we look at this hybrid exciton, then we see that we not only have this HOMO here included as the electron, as the final state, but we have 2 bands here included as the hole, and one of them has TMDC character. This is this contribution of here, and one of these bands has organic character, and this is this contribution. So we basically have an exciton that has contributions from both sides, the TMDC and the organic molecule. And it has a mixed character of Frankel and Wannier type, because depending on where you look at, it's very localized in one case and very delocalized in the other case. So, but you see here the different character of the electron. Okay, with this I would like to point out that everything that I've shown you was calculated with the most exciting code, of course. It is a code that implements density functional theory, time-dependent DFT, all kinds of spectroscopy. So we really have a very strong focus on spectroscopy. And I would like to point out that we recently, are publishing a review article. It's under review, but where it's on arXiv, where we summarize everything that the code can do or has been developed into the last years. I also would like to advertise a little bit our summer school, or this hands-on workshop that will happen in July this year in Berlin. And probably just mention on passing that we also work on benchmark data for spectroscopy, because exciting is very, very precise. So we have micro-Hartree precision in the ground state, and also it propagates to the excited state. That's why we create benchmark data. We also try to come up with measures for how to measure the quality of the results that we have. So we have spectral fingerprints developed, and we also deal with research data management, both on the experimental as well as the theoretical side. You may know the NOMAD database, where we can upload data. Well, it was established as a database for computational data. Now we can include also all kinds of different experiments in the database. You can also install this a local instance of this database on your computer to share the research data within your group or within your research environment, institute or university, and decide later whether you would like to upload it to the general data infrastructure. Yeah, and with this I would like to point out again the people whom you may have seen already popping up in the different publications. And there are quite many. I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Claudia. It's very impressive. So, any questions?
Thank you so much for this very nice talk. I had a question about the time-resolved Zane signal of the zinc oxide film materials that you modeled at the K-edge spectroscopy. So you see 2 bleach peaks, right? 2 ground state bleaching peaks, followed by 2 peaks, 2 positive peaks corresponding to the excited state. So I was curious, what do these peaks represent? Because my guess is that you have photoexcited electrons and holes shielding the core exciton, so leading to a decrease in the binding energy, right? Yeah. But if you have a decrease in the binding energy, I guess you would need less energy to eject a core 1s electron. This looks like an oxidation process, or am I mistaken?
I'm not quite sure if I understood. So you're right. So the additional screening that you see here, well, the effect is mostly screening, means that you're closer to the just independent particle onset, so the binding energy decreases. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. But then, of course, where you deplete, bleach your spectrum first, and the excitation energy goes, or you have a some rule, right? So the number of excited states is the same. So you always must have also some increase at a different different point, right?
Did they collect also the time resolve EXAFs on this sample? Do you know?
I think so. I would need
Yeah.
to look up the
Okay.
supplementary material of this paper, right?
Okay. And
Yeah.
also I was curious, did you also model the time resolve edge spectroscopy?
Yes, we did the
Yeah?
same. It
Okay.
also shows very similar agreement. It's also in this paper. It's very similar to the
Okay.
to this KHS.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Can you say a few words about how you compute the screening in this case?
Okay, I go back here. So for the femtosecond process, we use time-dependent DFT, which tells you how the electron occupations are repopulated or changed over time. Well, we fix the bump fluence. We can do it for different bump fluences, and then let it propagate on the femtosecond level. And then we take these occupation numbers and do a constrained or non-equilibrium Bethe-Sal beta. And when we put this into the dielectric screening, of course, Bethe-Sal beta, as you have seen, the direct term, the attractive term, includes the screened Coulomb interaction. And so putting these occupation numbers in the screening gives us basically the effect of additional screening for the Bethe-Sal beta equation. Right?
The occupation number seems to...
they enter the Bethe-Sal beta equation. So
yeah, but in the poly blocking, right? Not in the screening.
no, both. It's both. Well, let me go back to the...
yeah, but how?
Here. Here. So Bethe-Sal beta equation, so first the occupation numbers are here. So in this case, we just assume that valence bands are filled and conduction bands empty. But of course, if you do it constrained, then you have also the occupations here, right? So they enter the occupations, but they also enter the computation of the dielectric screening, right? And if you add these occupations in the dielectric screening, you get the difference in the screening, so it's the screening, and if you add it here, then you get the Pauli blocking. Right? So you can do it differently or separately in order to check which effect is more strongly. At the end, we put it together, but for analyzing where it comes from, you can do it either here or there.
Okay, thanks.
So this methodology of calculating the non-equilibrium Bethe-Salpeter is similar to the approach. I have seen it, Daria Gorelova that was doing something. Is the same or?
It's not exactly the same. Well, what she does is very similar to what we do in RIXS. We're putting all this together now, but it's very similar. So all this methodology is very, very similar.
So here you start from the DFT, let's say non-equilibrium DFT, and in the other case you really calculate transition between excitons, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
Just to clarify myself, when you talk about exciton-exciton interaction, you are talking about you have several excitons that interact, or just when you compute the collective excitation of the system, you have two peaks which correspond to different excitations.
I mean, you mean, I called the RIXS process like this, right? Let me see where it is. No, it's further below. So here, you compute the core and the valence spectra independently, but of course you keep in mind all the ingredients here, and through this double differential cross sections, I mean it's a resonant process. They talk to each other, right? Because here you get the resonance they talk to each other. That's why it's a coupling between this, resonant coupling between these excitons on the core and the optical range.
So you don't have two excitons that couple like the electron.
No, it's really resonant parts inside this Hamiltonian or this process.
Really nice talk, thank you. The first is mostly curiosity. In the first example you provided, you mentioned about the possible role that defects could have in the spectra. So if you could comment on that, I would
Yeah,
appreciate.
actually, I don't have it here. I can show you afterwards, but I can comment on this. So, typically, oxides are very defect prone. So there is oxygen vacancies everywhere, and we know that in this barium steinite, oxygen vacancies reduce the binding energy. So this is a large bandgap material, which is used for high power electronics and field effect transistors and whatnot. But realizing that the binding energy is reduced by these defects, one could also take advantage of these defects and use it for solar cells. And so we were actually approached by an experimental group who asked us to explain this. Now I come back to the example I talked to you yesterday, because if you have a defected system, you can't create a big enough supercells where you can put in defects at any concentration and configuration. So it is impossible with DFT and these methods. So we use cluster expansion for this, which means that we break down the big cell with a certain defect concentration into small unit cells, and then you compute the effective interactions from the small unit cells. And this is still not good for good enough to give you a good band gaps and spectra, because it's not a linear dependence on the concentration. So depending on where you put these defects, you could even have a mid-gap state, so you could have even metallic character. So depending on the defect and the concentration, the character of the electronic structure is very different. And so we came up with a non-linear cluster expansion, so combining cluster expansion with machine learning in order to predict band gaps that non-linearly depend on the defect concentration. And so this is a long story, but cut short.
At the end, it would be some sort of average effect on those different defects, right?
To some extent, it's an average effect. Yeah. So depending also on the temperature, which of these configurations you populate, and yeah.
And the other question I had was relates to organic inorganic interfaces. I found it quite interesting, and there's one thing though that I'm not quite sure to what extent this is accounted for, because the interaction between the molecules and the inorganic substrate is very weak. They're usually physisorb. And so there are several, for example, in Graz, Leonard Grill uses pulses to actually propel these molecules over, so you can excite the molecule, and this excitation will eventually, populate some vibrational states of the molecule that will propel the molecule over the surface for very long distances. And so
these are molecular monolayers. It's not a single molecule, but these are really monolayers. And they're very weakly bound, right? So, but I'm knowing from all the previous studies that the interaction between the molecules in the monolayer is approximately of the same strength. It's also van der Waals interaction, like the van der Waals interaction between the molecule and the substrate. So you would not shift the whole.
I know,
thing,
but still, I mean, the fact that you could get, for example, in the absorption spectra, could be substantially larger than the one you would get from a small deviation from the equilibrium position. Meaning, if you would realign the pyrroline molecule, for example, not with the molybdenum atoms.
Okay, yeah, but this is very small difference because of this weak bonding, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it's very. You can try this out, move it around. So this is actually the geometry is optimized using van der Waals interaction. So this is, yeah. And also for the other example, this BTCDA on the tungsten selenide, we have experimental data as well. But then we also looked at this in different geometries. The essence is the same. So how the levels are aligned don't really depend very much on the actual position where they are. So
Okay.
so quantitatively, of course, it's not fully quantitative, but qualitatively we are always on the safe side. Let's put it like this.
Thank you.
Very nice talk, Claudia. In the first slides, you say that you treat electron hole and electron-phonon coupling at the same level. At the beta salpeter, how can you include the electron-phonon
we didn't
effects?
do yet. I said I just showed you the other example in the beta salpeter where you basically would also include the screening coming from phonons. But you could also explicitly put the self-energy effect into beta salpeter, which would help you also to explain the temperature dependence of the spectra. We're working on this. We have not yet, in this case, it's not yet done. So here, electron-phonon interaction basically is included in renormalizing the band gap, and this is 0.18 electron volt or something.
But not
like
including
this,
the broadening of the...
Not, it's just a shift, not the broadening.
It's just
not yet,
a shift, yeah.
Yeah.
And in TDDFT, when you do real-time TDDFT, it is poorly coherent. No decoherence mechanisms.
Yeah, actually, we have molecular dynamics combined with TDFT, so it's included in the code. But this was Ehrenfest, yeah.
Okay.
But this was the pure electronic propagation. Yeah.
Okay, and does it change a lot when you put some molecular dynamics and?
We have some first examples on hybrid inorganic organic perovskite for this pump probing. There we're doing better in terms of these picosecond excitations.
Okay.
So on top of here we do a very brute force model by changing the lattice parameter, but now we have also example of where you see that we are improving. But these are the first steps we're doing in this direction. Right?
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for the talk. Yeah, so my question was about this transient absorption, and first here the two pulses are not overlapping, right? So one comes first, and then the other comes after. So if the two pulses would be overlapping, I guess you couldn't really do it the way you do it, because unless you assume like instantaneous eigenstates, right? So you would have to include like excitonic effects in the time in the TDDFT or your time propagation and other things. Yeah, that's one. And so then the next is if you included electron-phonon coupling actually here, but I guess you said that you included some kind of
in this case it's not included yet.
In this case not?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so no more questions. So the last one, just after your experience, I'm coming back to the solar cell modeling. We have seen that it's so difficult, right? And then it's going to depend also the vacancies. The crystal is not perfect. So how predictive we can be with these tools that we have nowadays?
As I said, I didn't have time to talk about this nonlinear cluster expansion, where we really can deal with defects. We can deal with, cluster expansion is a multi-scale modeling technique where we break down the complexity of a defected material into many, many different smaller or larger cells that include these defects, and then cluster expand the property. It's like an Ising kind of model. in terms of these interactions. And these interactions we get from these ab initio calculations. So in that sense, what this cluster expansion is typically used for is for energetics, for calculating convex halls of alloys and so on. Now, and you can actually do this with the accuracy of the underlying ab initio calculations, right? Because cluster expansion is a mathematically very sound model. It should converge in principle. And if you have good enough representative samples where you can get the cluster interactions from, then you basically transfer your ab initio accuracy to the big problem. Now, having this said, for spectroscopy or so, this would not work. So we need many-body interactions there. And with this nonlinear cluster expansion, now we can also break down our spectroscopic properties, like band gaps or so, into smaller pieces and predict predict these properties for defected or for big cells. So we have shown this. This was a PRL appearing last year for DFT spectra or for DFT band gaps, but you can basically then transfer this to many-body perturbation theory. This is what we're doing now. We compute basically GW band gaps for these bits and pieces, for these smaller structures, and then predict basically the GW accuracy or for defected cells. So I'm quite confident that we're going here in the right direction and can also get the ab initio accuracy for big systems.
Okay, so I think that's all. So thank you very much.
Thank you.